Welcome to InSight. I'm Wendy Brokaw. You know, the Willamette Heritage Center is so popular, and yet during the pandemic, it's had a hard time figuring out what do we do when we can't open our doors to the public. Well, that got them thinking. Why don't we invite them in a different way? And that's exactly what they did. Would you please welcome my guest, Josh Henderson, who came up with a great idea that turned out to be wildly popular, and it's called Zooming Back to History, a series that started in the spring and is continuing in the fall. Josh, hello, welcome to InSight.
Thank you for having me, Wendy.
Did you expect it to be this wildly popular?
I think when our executive director, came up with this idea last fall, I don't exactly think she knew what to expect. But we had a good turnout, which led to doing a second season in the spring of 2021. And then, following the success on that, we've continued to do it with 4 brand new speakers who I'm absolutely excited to host virtually, just because their topics are so interesting. And I think folks in our community will really resonate with their topics.
You just had one speaker already, and that was Dr. Terrance Emmons. And tell us a little bit about him.
He was absolutely fantastic. He's a retired history professor from Stanford University, but he's also a longtime Salem native. And he recently wrote a book on Walter D. Pugh, who is a pioneering Oregon architect who designed a lot of iconic buildings in the Willamette Valley in the early 20th century. And even in the late 19th century as well, including our own Thomas K. Woolen Mill. And he has a really interesting connection with him that he's actually the grandson of this pioneering architect. But it was totally another thing to hear somebody who is actually a family member of this wonderful person in Oregon history, and to hear all those personal stories of growing up with his grandfather.
Do you remember something that he said about his grandfather that people didn't know?
What was it? He after he published his book, he keeps finding out new facts about his grandfather or buildings that he may have designed. So he shared a couple facts with us about his grandfather designing or redesigning several buildings on Willamette University's campus. After a previous architect designed the building, and then there was a fire. And then his grandfather was then asked to redesign the building. And that was something that he had no idea about. So it was after his book. So it was we got an exclusive piece of information that hadn't been shared before.
Half the fun of digging back into history and finding.
Yeah, it sounds like I think he's going to continue, doing research on his grandfather. It may not go into a book, but he's certainly passionate about it.
Thank you for that. Now let's go on to our next speaker, who is going to be on October 21st, and that is retired Chief Justice Paul Demiunis. What is he going to be talking about?
Yes. So former Oregon Supreme Court Chief Justice Paul Demiunis, who's now retired from the Oregon Supreme Court, is actually taking his retirement in stride and is writing a biography on former Oregon Supreme Court Justice James T. Brand, who was on the Oregon Supreme Court during World War II and actually took a leave of absence from the court to preside over the judge's trial at Nuremberg following World War II.
Josh, how is it that an Oregon judge found his way to the Nuremberg trials in the first place?
This is absolutely fascinating. When I initially reached out to him, I had really no idea what he'd be presenting on, or that he was currently writing this biography. But I am absolutely blown away that I had no idea that an Oregon Supreme Court justice actually was asked by President Truman to preside over one of the Nuremberg trials. Actually, this specific trial and the specific person that he's going to be talking about was featured in a film starring Spencer Tracy called Judgment at Nuremberg. So I think this will be absolutely fascinating. I think a lot of people who are maybe familiar with the Nuremberg trials probably had no idea that it had an Oregon connection. So his insight as a Supreme Court justice will be absolutely invaluable.
That's great. And that's going to be on when? October?
It will be on October 21st at 7 p.m.
Great, thank you. That was interesting. All right, let's go on to the next speaker, and that's going to be on November 18. Actually, it's two people. It's Andrea Kinsey and Larry Landis.
Yes, both of them have been heavily involved in the Oregon Century Farm and Ranch program. Andrea Kinsey is actually the director of this program, and Larry Landis is an archivist and historian from Oregon State University who has spent nearly 30 years conducting research on local history. So both of them will be talking about the Oregon Century Farm and Ranch program and all the research it takes to actually receive this wonderful distinction as an Oregon farm family.
It's hard to remember sometimes, but so much of our history was farming, agriculture. Yes. When students went to school, most of them came from farming communities years ago.
And Willamette Valley has such a rich, farming history. As early Euro-American pioneers, settled in this area, and these farms have been passed down from generation to generation. And there are many families who have been farming the same land for over 100 years and sometimes even 150 years. And I think they're just absolutely excited about it. Not only to share what the program is about, but to share all the research that goes in to tracking down the genealogy and looking up census records to understand that these people have been here or their ancestors have been here for over 100 years.
That sounds fascinating. Well, and speaking of agriculture, there's a different kind, and it involves breweries. And you have a fascinating story involving the role of women in Oregon's hops brewery business.
Yes,
Tell us about that.
We are absolutely honored to be hosting virtually Tia Edmondson Morton, who's the archivist at the Oregon Hops and Brewery Archive. She actually is a pioneer in herself. She was the first person in the United States to start a hops and brewing archives, which is held at Oregon State University. So we're very lucky to have her, and she's going to be talking a little bit about Oregon's brewery history. And I think everyone who lives in the Willamette Valley or Oregon is familiar that we have a really rich brewing and beer culture here. But I think not that many people know that women played an important role in Oregon's brewery upbringing in the 19th century. So she's going to be talking about Oregon brewery wives in the 19th century, which I think will be absolutely fascinating. It's kind of an interesting twist on the historical topic. She's going to share all of her research on that. I think she's actually writing a book on it. So we'll get a little bit of a sneak peek of her book that she'll be writing when she talks to us on December 16th.
And how can people find out more about this Zooming Back to History Fall series?
Sure. So if you go to our website, which is www.willametteheritage.org, and you go under our events page, click Zooming Back to History, and it will take you to our page with all of our speakers and a little bit of a description on their background as well as their topic. And then we'll provide links to where you can register for each series. It is a fundraiser, so we would love if everyone, maybe took an evening and watched one of these speakers and really, engaged with the conversation on mid-Willamette Valley history.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I would just like to remind folks that, we are actually open to the public on a regular basis, Tuesday through Saturday from 10 to 4 p.m. So if you don't want to wait for one of these wonderful events we have and you just want to maybe revisit and reconnect with our beautiful grounds, feel free to stop on by. We're welcome to have you. Masks are required on our grounds, but I think a lot of folks would like to reconnect with us, and we'd love to have folks.
Thank you, Josh. This has been a really wonderful learning experience for me, and I hope people realize we have a very rich history, so embraced by all the activities that are going on at the Willamette Heritage Center. And I enjoyed the fact that you created this series, and may it have a long run. Josh Henderson, thank you for joining us today on InSight, and thank you for joining us. I'm Wendy Brokaw.